Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to this episode of the Refurbishment Mastery podcast, where I'm delighted to introduce you to another guest. This is actually a very, very long-standing friend and contact through property investing, someone that I probably met in my very first few months of engaging with property investors. Back in the days when I was still running a building contracting business, I went along to a meeting and there was a fella there. I think he was dressed in a yellow shirt then. He's wearing a yellow shirt as I'm talking to him now. I've seen him every time I see him. In the meantime, he wears a yellow shirt. Yeah. He just blew my mind because he opened up my eyes to the fact that my knowledge and skills in refurbishment and construction was being held back because I hadn't got any money. And I met this fella called Kevin Wright, who just opened my eyes to how you could use finance way more creatively than I was aware of at that time, and as a result potentially pick up a lot more deals than I was at the time. So thank you very much for joining me today, Kevin. It's really great to be speaking to you. And I know we see each other a reasonable amount and we keep in touch with each other and we work together. But it's really good to have you here with me today. Perhaps you could do the full introduction and tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to be working with property investors.
Well, I've got a background in finance. In the latter part of the 20th century, as it is now, I was advising people on pensions and investments. I would have already been investing in property for several years before that. And I hit a crisis point about, middle of that last decade where, someone would say to me, oh, I've got 500,000, for example, how should I invest it? And my compliance had to tell them, well, you should be putting this much in this stock market fund and that much in that stock market fund. And I'm thinking to myself, but I wouldn't do any of that because I'd stick it in property. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. So I actually withdrew my licenses and moved over into brokering mortgages. Because then I was dealing with people that, thought like me.
Yeah.
So it was really that sort of lack of congruence that got me, moved into that. And then, a 20 plus year career of brokering mortgages of every sort, but then it led into more creative types of finance. So I'd never classify myself as a mortgage broker. I think that's too restrictive. All that did include mortgages. So when people said, well, what sort of broker are you? I would always say a property finance broker, because it really allowed the whole thing, with commercial mortgages. But, my big thing is bridging finance and sharing with the property investor community that it's actually something to be embraced, not something to run away and scare from. 20 plus years brokering everything from simple buy-to-lets up to multi-million pound development loans, which around about 2012, because I was speaking at most of the property networking meetings. Sometimes I was doing 1, 2, or even some weeks 3 a week. And all over the country. And people kept coming up to me and said, this is like, at a reaction just like you had, really. That was a very common reaction. Wow, you've blown my mind. I never knew this was possible. And it became clear that an hour's talk wasn't enough. And they kept coming up to me and saying, where can we come and learn this?
Right.
And And by 2013, I thought, okay, well, and there's a demand here. I'm going to start teaching it. And it started with a simple 1 day workshop, but it grew and grew and grew, to the point where I stepped back from brokering, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and just got into the training and mentoring full time, just because I couldn't cope with the demand for training and do day-to-day brokering. So, I sold my
Yeah.
shares in the brokerage to my business partner. I'm still really close with them guys, and I'm their, if you like, face on social media. They don't really do social media much, um, but I still act for them in that
Mm.
place. So since then, I've just been training and mentoring people, and actually getting them to produce life-changing results by me, if you like, hand holding them, um, to implement the stuff that I know how to do, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which
Absolutely.
which is, and I've written a book, by Refurb, Refinance, that turned into an Amazon bestseller. And the tagline to it is Ninja Tactics to Build a Whole Portfolio from a Single Pot of Cash, which is what Buy Refurb Refinance is all about. That's my thing. Over a decade ago, I was calling it Recycle Your Cash, which is another way to describe the same thing. But Buy Refurb Refinance as a phrase sort of become precedent in the last, what, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. So,
Yeah.
so I now run BRR events, both virtual and in person. So I think that's enough of a
Yeah,
intro.
that's it. Well, and of course, any listeners will realise it's me that helps you with one of those R's on the refurbishment side of things, and
Absolutely, it is. Yeah,
provide some support to your
yeah,
community and your groups
yeah.
in all of that. But yeah, I mean, it's so, I think it's indicative of a lot of people that there's a lot of people with some really good knowledge out there, and that as I've done, we all trail around the meetings, and then. Exactly the same story with me, really. I was going to meetings and people were saying, we've only got 45 minutes with you.
Mm.
What if you could teach us more, and what if we knew more about it? And that's kind of how I evolved
Yeah,
into
right.
into training
Yeah.
myself. What are the kind of creative things that you were talking about then? What are you talking about now? What kind of creative things with finance are you generally explaining to people?
Yeah. Well, these principles haven't changed in, like, well, 15 years that I've been talking about them and training them, and the principles are still the same. So it's essentially, BRR works best. And I know there are different people talking about it, but it actually works best when you buy a property that is unmortgageable.
Yeah.
Um, because if you, and I know not many people like to talk about that, because they're all saying, "Oh, get something mortgageable." I know most trainers that do talk about BRR talk about, get it mortgageable, tidy it up a little bit, and then refinance out. But there's two big reasons why that's not going to work. One is everybody wants those properties.
Mm.
Everyone wants the ones that, are not too shabby. Maybe you can smarten up the kitchen, smarten up the bathroom, bit of decoration, new flooring. Everyone wants them. So, if you've got 20 people after the same property, you're never going to buy it cheap enough to pull enough cash out at the back end. And the second thing is, if it's good enough to get a mortgage on and there's not much wrong with it, there's not much you can do to improve it and add value.
Yeah.
So, buy refurb refinance only really works when you go for the more extreme properties that the mortgage lender says, property's fine, just not in that condition. Fix it up first, and then we'll lend on it.
Yeah.
So, you could call them the cash buyer only type of properties, although not every agent labels up an unmortgageable property as cash buyer only. A lot do. Um, so it's those problem properties. It might have some specific problem that mortgage lenders don't like until it's fixed, rather than just pure dilapidation. So it could be that too. But those you tend to find that there's way less interest in buying them. My mentees often see properties that have sat around for months,
Yeah.
and are still for sale because no one really wants to take them on. So what does that mean? You've got more, um, I'll use the word desperate, more desperate sellers that are just absolutely fed up at still having this property and can't sell it. And they become much more flexible on the price they'll accept.
Yeah.
So less interest, more problematic, um, buy it cheaper. You've got to spend more on it, but if you buy it cheap enough, you can build that into it. And then because you're fixing more significant problems, you're adding more significant value. And then at the top end of that, I mean, some people just sell them and that's fine, but refinancing them at an uplifted value that should, done correctly, pull most of your cash out. Done really well, all of your cash out, but more commonly, you get most of your cash out. You get a little bit of residual money left in, which you can get back out over the positive rental cash flow.
Yeah.
In a year, not much more.
Yes. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I've from a construction perspective, I've been saying to people for years, you should be running towards these dilapidated
Yeah,
problems with structural cracks and
yeah,
all sorts of issues rather than running away because there's too many people running towards the easy stuff.
that's right.
And I've said to people for a long time, if you buy a rundown property, actually you're not even just competing with property investors in some situations. You're competing with keen DIYers.
Yeah,
A young family that will pretty
yeah,
much camp in the living room,
yeah,
painting parties at the weekend and what have you,
yeah,
and pay a premium for the property because they're buying with their heart rather than
yeah,
buying
absolutely.
as an investment. So yeah, I've always said run towards the things with problems, and as
Yeah,
you touched on, not just construction problems, but it could be legal problems.
yeah,
I've bought properties with incorrect planning
yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah,
an HMO that was illegally they were
yeah,
breaking the terms of the license, and we sorted
yeah.
things out. So it is those kinds of things, and I'm sure most people would say, "Oh, this sounds like he's talking about bridging finance." Is that a fair
It
summary,
is,
or is
yeah,
there a lot more
yeah,
to it than that?
absolutely, yeah. And the the secret is to get comfortable with bridging finance. And how do you do that? By knowing how it works.
Yeah,
We're fearful about what we don't understand, naturally, but we're not fearful about things that we know about.
yeah,
So and I mean, personally, I brokered hundreds of bridging loans over more than a decade period. So I know it instinctively, upside down, inside out, every which way. And what I've done over the last decade or more is just to give people that education into having the same degree of confidence, and also, holding their hand, so they don't make any basic mistakes. But yeah, but what does bridging allow you to do? Well, it allows you to borrow 100% of the works costs, for one thing. So, that liberates people because they would normally think, well, I've got to have enough cash to put down a 25% deposit, but I've also got to have enough cash to fund the works. And that keeps people playing a much smaller game because they're looking at properties where they need that much cash for that. If you can liberate that and say, well, look, you just worry about 25% deposit, the rest you can borrow.
mm,
Now they can think, oh well, now I can just go up, another 100 grand level on properties, or something like that. So they can, raise the bar on the deals that they believe they can do.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
I'm sure most people say to you, but bridging finance really expensive, isn't it?
oh, every day. You know the old saying, if I had a pound for every time someone said that, yeah. Uh, what's the other phrase? Oh, they've said that more than I've had hot dinners.
Yes,
That's the
yeah,
other.
I'm sure.
Um, well, you see, but this is the perception, and while it is more expensive than mortgages, but of course it does things that mortgages don't do. So that's okay. But see, the real secret that I teach people is that you once you understand the cost of bridging, you price it into your offer
Yeah, of course.
in the same way you price the works costs into your offer.
Yes.
If you say like this property is going to take 40 grand to put it right, you would clearly offer 40 grand less.
Yeah,
And if bridging is going to cost you 20 grand on top of the 40 grand, you'd offer 60 grand less.
that's right. Yeah, it's a simple calculation when you
It is.
know what to expect.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is don't talk to people outside of property, because anyone outside of property is super scared about bridging. There's people in property that are scared about bridging, but outside they're super scared, and they're only really seeing bridging as something I should have for 3 days because I couldn't quite tie up the sale of my residential house with the purchase of the new one, and so I've got bridging for 3 days, and and of course 3 days really isn't a great deal of cost at all and not much risk, but we're
But
just extending that period.
I found the most amazing quote, and it was by a Middle East philosopher called Rumi from the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
And he said, when you're about to embark on a long journey, don't take advice from people that had never left home.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good. Yeah, Rumi.
Rumi, Rumi. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
this is not just property, bridging, this is property. So, and I see this all the time. People, they're getting into property, and the people watching this, you might be feeling this right now. You're not that experienced in property, and you start talking about it to the people you work with and the people you socialize with, and they give you a really negative response
Yeah,
about it. Yeah. And then you think, and maybe you don't, but you should think to yourself, but based on what? What have you done in property that gives you um, a knowledgeable standpoint to come and do that? And of course, they've done nothing.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And this is the roomy thing, isn't it? Don't listen to people that have done nothing in property telling you what you shouldn't do and do in property.
That's it. And that of course is the success of the networking meetings we were talking about, really, because you're suddenly in a room with people talking and thinking the same way as you. So for anyone listening, really, that hasn't been to networking meetings, property related networking meetings, I'd actively encourage you to search down, some in your area, become a regular member.
Yeah,
I tend to go to one meeting on a regular basis and dip in and out of a few others, depending on what I'm doing and where that fits. But I do like to be a member of one meeting most of the time. I hosted a PIN meeting, Property Investors Network meeting, for 8 years.
I remember you did.
Really, just to that gave me some credibility, got me some confidence speaking and standing at the front, and what happened, what have you. But what was really interesting was the number of people that would come along to those meetings for their first night, often on a free ticket because they'd found a voucher somewhere. And then at the end of the night, they say, "Oh yeah, this is brilliant. This is where I want to be. I'll see you next month." And we never would. And it's like, yeah, I think you've got to put a lot more into it. So yeah, for anyone who hasn't networked, go networking, particularly if you are currently, shall we say, networking with mates down the pub that haven't got a property background. If you've got an aspiration, if you're aspiring to work in property, go and meet some other property investors, because it's not a lot of money. It's a good night out, even if you're even if nothing comes from the first few meetings. And by the way, you can't guarantee anything will come from the first few meetings. It is just a time game. Well, have you got any case studies, Kevin, that you can just give us a bit of a story?
Well,
How have you used all of this finance?
more than you can shake a stick at after
Oh,
all this.
sure, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. We've got a limited time. Let's
yeah,
pick one or
but
two good ones.
I will, but it would be remiss of me not to mention, as you talked about property networking meetings, it would be remiss of me not to mention my own chain of midweek evening property
Of
networking.
course. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, Property Chats is my brand, and you can check them out on propertychats.com. Really simple. Now, um, I'm a bit of a contrarian. I invest in property like almost no one else does. I train like almost no other trainer does. I mentor like almost no other mentor does. So of course, if I'm going to do networking meetings, I'm going to do networking meetings like almost no other networking
Yeah.
meeting. So Property Chats is a bit of a mold breaker in terms of midweek evening networking meetings. First of all, it's free to attend, no
Yeah.
charges.
Good.
Secondly, no speakers. To because every time you're sitting listening to someone, you're not networking because you can't. You're sat in a seat being passively being talked at. Now, regardless of whether the information is good, and most of the time it is, it's not networking. And then by the time you typically have introductions, updates, announcements, plug for a bit of training, often. Actually, the networking time is really squeezed. So I said, no, we're not going to have any of that. It's just turn up for a couple of hours, 7 to 9 p.m. typically, although some people get there early and some people stay there later, and just talk property.
Yeah.
It's free to attend, no speakers, and they all meet on the same day every month for simplicity, first Thursday.
Which
Um,
is my apologies why I've never been there, because I don't have a regular recurring booking on the first Thursday of the month. But
there you
otherwise,
go.
yeah, absolutely. And I think this is all about finding what works for you.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's great to go off and see a speaker because the content is exactly what interests you, and or you need some ideas and inspiration. But other
absolutely.
times, and in fact, I was at an event last night. There were a very small property event. There were only six of us,
Yeah.
and yeah, we covered so much more as a result of sitting around a table. We actually had dinner together.
Right.
But
Yeah. Right.
some of these small groups are often better. As a speaker, I used to love having a room of 100 and something people, but but
Yeah.
in reality, I probably got some of my best follow-up leads from small rooms where people could talk to me one to one, and you'll learn so much more one to one. So yeah, look for the network in there, property chats. I've seen that there's a good number around the country, so I'm sure there's
Yeah,
one
and we've
pretty
got we've
close
got
to
two
you.
more. I mean, we're now talking. This is August 2025. We've got two more open up in September in Essex and Yorkshire. But yeah, it's a growing thing. But there
Yeah.
we are. So okay, case studies. So another great thing about bridging finance is that with the right deal, you don't have to put 25% down.
Okay.
Um, because there's a variant that I teach called market value bridging. Now, let's just position this and why this is really useful. So, um, the basis of any mortgage and the basis of most bridging is the lower of purchase price or value.
Okay.
So, for give a very round example, and just for ease of description, uh, you got a property and the value goes out there and they can see, oh, this is worth 100 grand any day of the week. It's worth 100 grand. But actually, you're buying it at 80. So we're going to ignore the value and we're just going to give you a 75% mortgage based on the purchase price. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much every mortgage works like that. And most bridging works. What's market value bridging? Market value bridging says we'll lend on the lower of the asking price or value, and we'll ignore what you're paying for it.
Okay. Yeah.
So now, if it's let's say the asking price is 110, they've been a bit toppy as sellers often are, um, but it's actually worth 100. So the mortgage lender would just default to 75% of 80, but a market value bridger would say, well, hang on a minute, our valuer says it's worth 100. They're asking 110. Well, that's a bit too much, really. but it's actually worth 100, so we'll lend 75% of that. Now, if you happen to be buying it for 80, wow, then your deposit is shrunk, because that 20 grand is now counted as part of your deposit.
Yes.
Now, I've had a YouTube channel for about 6 years coming up, and my most popular ever video on there, the one with the most watches of all, is how to shrink the deposit to way less than 25%.
Yeah. Because that's what everyone wants to do. They want to
I
get
know.
started for as little money as possible. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it makes total sense now.
yeah, case study then. Jordan and Lisa, young couple, up in Lincoln. Actually, they're regulars to my Lincoln property chats meeting. Um, but they found a property. It was severely dilapidated. It had sat on the market partly because they were asking too much money for it. They were asking, I think, 165.
Mm.
And um, Jordan said to the agent, he said, "Look, I buy properties like this all the time, but I'm not even going to embarrass you by putting an offer in because it's going to be nowhere near 165." Just to give you an example, the done up value was going to be 170 to 180. So they were asking almost the done up value.
Yeah.
I think it was a probate deal. Um, but anyway, so Gordon, Jordan just kept track of it. He saw they dropped it to 140. So he said, oh, okay, now I'm going to go and view it. So he viewed it, um, and said, well, it needs a good refurb, almost back to brick. So it's still way overpriced. So in the end, they put an offer in, they messed around and had a bit of, toing and froing. And eventually they got it accepted at 95,000.
Nice.
Yeah. Because they put a plausible reason. They justified why. Look, it's only going to be worth this. We've got to spend that. We're going to want to make some money on it. Otherwise, why bother? So all of that is, the right price for it is 95,000.
Yeah.
And then eventually they agreed. Now, little side note, that was, I think, 32% below the asking price, the
Wow.
reduced asking price.
Yes.
And a lot of my mentees do end up buying property 20 to 30% below the asking price. So the Bridges valuer went out there and the Bridges valuer said, well, even in this condition, we would value it at 140,000.
Right.
So we're going to give you a bridging loan based on 140,000. Now they said, if we lent you 75%, we'd be giving you money to buy it. And we're not, and we're not
Yes.
going to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
So look, you're buying it at 95. How about if we lent you 91 and you so of course Jordan didn't need to, and Elisa didn't need to think too hard about saying yes to that.
Yeah. Yes. Brilliant.
So 4 grand deposit to buy a
To
95
buy a property.
thousand property. Now they did that. Now they had some cash, so they just then used their own money to do the refurb. And part of what they also learned from me is how to present your property to mortgage lenders, valuers when you come to refinance. I think they could have gone and got it valued at 180, but they went a little bit more cautious and got 170. And guess what? They got it valued at 170.
Yeah.
Now, what that meant is that after they paid all their bridging costs, they had £6,000 of their cash left in the property. It rents out at a profit of £400 a month. So that 6 grand would come out in about 15 months.
Let's jumping in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. obviously within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording. And of course, a lot of things are very generic. So, what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. And what's really interesting for anyone listening is we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds here. I guess this was pretty much a family house, was it? Or became a family house?
It was a little terrace property,
Yeah, that's it.
Front door straight out on the pavement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just an old Victorian terrace property.
That's it. So whilst you hear a lot of people talking about building, developing things into blocks of flats and commercial to resi and some of the big sexy stuff, if you haven't done that, I would encourage you not to be doing that as your first deal. No. Start with these little terraced houses, because as a result of that, your mentees have now learned more about the process. They've learned about the finance process. They've learned about the refurbishment process. They've now got a relationship with a builder, possibly used an architect as well, and they've learned on something that's pretty low risk, and ultimately left $6,000 in a deal at the end of the day. Which the question really then is beggars is, well, how many of those can you find? Because in due course, there's a nice little portfolio there without having to have some money in the first place.
That's right. That wasn't their first deal. Their very first deal, they flipped it to build their cash pot.
Right.
Similar sort of property, similar sort of margin, built that to their cash pot, and that cash from that paid for the refurb on this one.
Yes.
And it's a good place to start, but actually, I see almost everyone progresses. Now, the current deal they're looking at is a house converted into 3 flats.
Right. Yes.
Same sort of problems. So again, now they're gonna they're scaling up a bit. But yeah, and Jordan said, you know what, Kevin? He said we're still using the same pot of cash we started out with.
Yes, because they can recycle so much every single time that they're growing that much faster. And that was how I always saw bridging finance, creative finance, was it is just that opportunity to scale that much faster. And I'm sure for some people listening to this, what you're talking about here is a massive eye opener. And I'm sure they're gonna they're perhaps like me, they won't be able to sleep tonight, because when I first heard you speak, it was, bearing in mind the very first meeting I went to as a builder, the speakers that month were talking about lease options, and I think I probably met you the second month, and you're talking about creative finance, and I used to know that the night after this meeting I was just not going to sleep because my head was just buzzing with ideas. What would be your top tips to ensure that these kinds of deals work for you? Clearly, buy below market value and negotiate. What other tips have you got?
I'm not sure whether you would buy it below market value. I think you would offer fair price. Here's the way I would pitch it: offer a fair price based on what you can make it worth, what it's going to cost you to make it worth that, and a decent margin for yourself.
And what
Um,
kind of margin do you think that should be?
I think it should be 20% of the done up value.
Right.
I
Okay.
think, yeah.
So,
Um,
because I frequently say probably 20% of the cost.
you could do that.
So
Yeah, that would be
so
probably about in my experience, probably about 15% of the done up
15%. Yeah.
value.
Yeah. So you're
Yeah,
suggesting build a little bit more in. And unfortunately I talk to a lot of people that say, well, I don't need to make any profit. I've got this. And it's like, well, if you don't want to make any profit, you might as well just give me your money and I'll help you make no profit from it. Because there's nothing
well,
in it. You've got to cover the risk.
yeah. Um, and if you don't want to make any money, there's a much simpler solution. Go and buy one already done up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Because you'll have
absolutely.
you'll have the same outcome, 25% trapped in the property, but none of the hassle of a refurb
Of
and
course.
none of the risk of it overrunning, overspending, or anything else that, yeah. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't want to make a profit out of it. Great. So just go and buy one already done up. Stick a tenant in there the week after you buy it. Happy days.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, look at what's right for you. Really, work out yeah the model
Yeah,
that is right for you. And something that Kevin's touched on, a few times is understanding the cost of your refurbishment
yeah,
and
100%. Yeah.
factoring that
Yeah.
into your calculation.
I know a fair bit about finance. I don't know anywhere near as much about refurbs. So what do I do? Defer to the person that knows as much about refurbs as I know about finance. Your good self.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And this is why we've all got to work with experts around us.
yeah,
And, don't be afraid of bringing in the experts to help you at the right point, either to to do the work for you or indeed train you,
yeah,
to do the right thing. And many years ago, when I was working as a project manager, that was my clients were people that were saying, "Yeah, there's a great opportunity here, Martin, but I don't want to get involved with managing the building works at all. I want to bring you in to deliver all of that through for me." That doesn't work quite so well in the small little refurbishments because
no,
there isn't enough margin, and
right,
that's ultimately what led to me training because a lot of property investors were saying, "Yeah, we can't afford you on small jobs. Can you teach us? Can you hold our hands whilst we do it?" So,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so
I'm going to
that
just
makes
pick
sense.
up on one point that you said there. So the people that want to do a refurb project that but don't want to make a profit, um, like without being unkind, get real.
Yeah.
And one other point, no bridging lender is going to fund a project where you make no profit.
So
Yeah.
what I see people saying, well, I'm going to do it with my own money, so I don't need to make any profit. And it's like, well, if the lenders won't lend to you with no profit, the
Mm,
clue is you shouldn't be doing it for yourself.
mm,
And the thing and correct me if this isn't quite the analogy, Kevin, but what I say to people is the reason the lenders want to see a profit is there is a chance the values could go down, there
yeah.
is a chance the build cost could go up. So it's already taking out, and we've got a contingency anyway, but it's actually putting more contingency into the scheme, so that at least they get their money out of it, if things don't go quite the way we planned, which can happen. And of course, in a volatile market, we don't know what might happen.
And let's put another context on this. Now, you know, um, investing in property um, is 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 not a hobby, or it shouldn't be a hobby. It should be a part-time income, possibly leading to a full-time income. Okay. Now, what business do you know that says I don't need to make a profit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
One that isn't going to be around for very long.
yeah. So I used to work for a construction company many years ago, and we got a new managing director. He called us into the office. We called us into the meeting room one day, and he sat us down, and there was a piece of headed paper in front of all of us. And he said, I want you to all look at the bit of headed paper and tell me where the charity number is on there. And of course, there was no charity number. He said, we don't do anything for no profit.
Correct.
We are not a charity. We're not
Yeah,
registered as a charity.
yeah, that's right.
And some people might obviously be, but profit covers risk. And you shouldn't see that as a negative
Yeah.
connotation,
I
although
think,
some people outside property might,
yeah,
and the papers might say greedy developers and greedy property investors. We're taking risk on. And if we're
yeah,
taking risk on,
it
we
is.
need to be rewarded for that,
Yeah.
because sadly, some of those risks will be a little bit too big. And also, we spend money on deals we never even buy, things
Okay.
that fall over because of legal problems
Yeah.
or vendors pull out or whatever. So we've got to cover all of those costs,
Yeah.
sunk costs on other deals. So yeah, we should be making profit without any doubt.
Mm. Yeah, good. I think it's a beginner mindset.
Yeah, yeah, I think so, and
Beginner
that's really
mindset.
why all we can do is just keep talking about it. Us and
Yeah.
other people that have got some more experience and are talking to people on a regular basis. Where do you think the market's going over the next 12 months? Is that a really hard question? I mean, we were having some conversations last night about the economy and how no one really seems to
Well,
know what's going on.
um, so we've seen that interest rates have come down this year.
Yeah,
Um, so mortgages will follow suit to a degree. So, mortgage anyone that's remortgaging in the next 12 months, well, it depends on what they're remortgaging from. If they're remortgaging from a 2-year deal that they did, um, in 2023, 2024, they'll get a cheaper mortgage.
yes,
Yeah.
okay, excellent.
If they're coming off a 5-year rate, then they're going to have a dearer mortgage, but not as dear as it's been in the last couple of years because, the spike in interest rates was in 2022, autumn 2022. So, pretty much 3 years ago as we speak, it all started to unravel. So you would, if you're just coming off a 5-year fixed rate, you would have had historically unprecedentedly low interest rates on your mortgage, and you might even have a sub 2%
Yeah,
deal. Well, you're not going to get that, but the sweetener is that luckily your fixed rate deal has rode out the peak, and we're now back on the downside again. So mortgages in the next 12 months are going to be a bit cheaper than they've been the last couple of years. Um,
good.
don't see them getting incredibly much cheaper because we've now got above target inflation. It should be, the Bank of England target is 2%. We're now nudging 4%. And if that persists into 2026, that's going to act as a choker on lower interest rates because, the typical blunt instrument to squash inflation is higher rates.
Yeah,
And that was what it was higher inflation. You remember it shot up in 2022, 2023 from round about 2% up to a peak of 11%. And so rates went up on 13 successive months to just choke off inflation, and it worked. Um, so they probably don't want to raise interest rates in the next 12 months, but they're probably not going to be too keen on cutting them until that inflation gets back closer to 2%. That's where we're at. I think old time landlords are gonna keep exiting the market.
yeah,
I read something that some 300,000 have exited in the last 5 years.
yeah,
Um, I think that's going to continue simply because they've got um, a pitch point, if you want to say, of 20 years ago. So
yes,
everything they relate to is what they were doing 20 years ago, and with just some justification, they'd say it's not like it was. And it isn't because the government have intervened in various ways to make it more awkward to be a private sector landlord than they did 20 years ago. So does that mean that investing in property is dead? No. but it is different.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing quite a few people coming into property now, and because they haven't got a touch point of 20 years ago, they're taking a pragmatic look and saying, right, what does it look like to be a landlord in 2025 and 2026 going forward? Um, can I still make it work? And um, maybe they're certainly approaching it differently than they would have done 20 years ago. And they're approaching it and saying, well, okay, if we do it this, and this, still works.
Yeah.
So I see the generational shift in own property ownership in the private rented sector, um, just continuing the process that it's done for certainly in the next 12 months. You know, one thing we've seen when you've been in property as long as I have, um, then regardless of the market conditions, there are always going to be people that need to sell.
Yes. Yeah.
Always. Um, so we haven't got a buyer's market. So we haven't got a seller's market now. It's a buyer's market. It could become more of a buyer's market in the next 12 months. That's more difficult to predict. But there's no indication that we're going to go back to the rampant seller's market of 2021 and 2022. I mean, we came out of COVID, of being locked down, and we went absolutely crazy for property.
Yeah.
Common sense went out the window. You were seeing 10%, 20% over asking price being achieved, incidentally, not supported by mortgage lenders' valuers. So
Okay. Yeah.
um, that they came back and said, listen, if you want to pay 20% over the asking price, you can do that. We're only lending on the asking price, and even that's a bit iffy. So if you want to put 45% deposit down rather than 25, be our guest.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
So
and a lot of people didn't. So that was probably the strongest sellers market we've seen in a decade or two. There's no indication we're going to go back to that. So it's still going to be predominantly a buyer's market, I think, going in the next 12 months. What does that mean? Opportunities. You know,
yeah, of course.
opportunities.
Yeah. Really interesting. Your answer there is pretty much what I've been saying to people over the last few months as well. I think there's some great opportunities out there.
Yeah.
I think there's space for some people to become, do we say, more motivated to some of the realistic uh, values that we're putting on properties in their current situation. I'm seeing a lot of talking about the landlords that have been in the market 20 years or so. I'm seeing a lot of properties come into the market that have been run as HMOs for about 20 years or so. You know, they were HMOs before we really knew what HMOs
Yeah.
were. Um, and what I'm finding is a lot of them are being valued. They're trying to sell them based on a yield,
Yeah.
based on the rents that they're getting at the moment, but without any acknowledgement that the property is dilapidated and rapidly going downhill.
Yeah.
So it's all right saying it's worth £300,000 based on yields, but when it needs 80 to £100,000 of refurbishment,
Yeah.
it ain't £300,000.
So,
And by the way, I'm not taking your tatty tenants on dodgy ASTs that you've set up.
yeah.
Therefore, I only want it vacant anyway.
Yeah.
So that seems to be where we are at the moment. But I'm starting to see more and more of those long-standing landlords coming round to realise that if they were going to get a lot of money from their properties, they really should have looked after them long ago.
Yeah.
And the learning here for all of us that are doing it now is, and I say this all of the time: look after your properties, do
Absolutely.
do the regular maintenance.
Yeah.
Um, when something's broken, look at what caused it to break. Don't just stick some sticky tape over it and make the
Yeah.
problem go away.
Yeah.
Solve the root problem,
Mm.
and you won't be in the position in 20 years' time, perhaps when you want to exit, that
Mm.
some of the landlords are in at the moment, where they haven't maintained and looked after their properties, and really, as a result, they haven't really got that value growth that they think that they're entitled to, and they think they've got. So yeah, some good stuff there. You've spoken about property chats on the first Thursday of every month. How else can people get hold of you, Kevin?
Well, quite simply, I've got two websites. My predominant one is recycleyourcash.co.uk.
Brilliant.
So just pop me a message in there, really. I mean, that's good. I mean, you can always connect me on Facebook. I mean, I think it's Kevin Wright, property finance expert. I think that might just be Kevin Wright Property on Facebook, but I've got a Facebook page and a lot of people contact me through there as well. So
that's great. We'll confirm all of that. We'll put all of that in the show notes for anyone listening in anyway, just so you can follow that up. In short, just look for the fella who's wearing a yellow shirt. You'll always find Kevin in a yellow shirt.
There you go.
And that's what he said. He's not quite mainstream. But if you meet him, you'll love him. A lovely fella, really knowledgeable, really, really one of the friendly, nice people in property investing. So do look him up if you want to connect. And with that, I just want to thank you very much for joining me today, Kevin. It's been great speaking to you. Great to have you sharing your knowledge and expertise with my audience, my community. And long may we continue to work alongside each other. Absolutely. And support each other's businesses, which is what I'd encourage anyone to do out there. Find people that you can support and that can support you. And this doesn't need to be one person trying to do everything on their own, because that's not how it works. So thank you very much. It's been great speaking to you, and I'll catch up with you again very, very soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.